Good day to everybody, and thank you very much, Cecile, for inviting me to this very exciting panel, and it's wonderful to be here with you in the room. Well, as Mamta just said, COVID-19 was not just a health catastrophe, it is also an economic catastrophe, particularly for individuals who work in the informal economy, workers that earn daily wages and piece rate earners. So in my country, COVID-19 lockdowns decimated livelihoods at an unprecedented scale. So to respond, our government allocated over $1.23 billion to deliver emergency cash assistance to 16.9 million families. This meant 100 million people, or half the country's population, which is the fifth largest in population terms globally. This was the most extensive social protection intervention ever in the history of the country, and it was being delivered during the most difficult situations in terms of the context of delivery. In terms of how it was done digitally, there were three digital capabilities which were brought into play to deliver what came to be then known as a SARS emergency cash. A SARS is the Urdu word meaning compassion, and we labeled it as the emergency cash instrument for the program. So as I said, there were three digital capabilities, all of which had been developed in the year prior to COVID in 2019. The first capability was a biometric payment system with special features. The second capability was a demand-side SMS-based request-seeking mechanism. And the third capability was a new wealth profiling, big data analytics mechanism. Now, we pulled a thread through these three digital capabilities and built the delivery system for what came, as I just said, it came to be known as a SARS emergency cash. The front-facing communication was such that it asked individuals who were in stress during that period to send their unique 13-digit national identity card numbers on an SMS short code. That SMS short code was 8171, and the program came to be known as 8171. This short code was widely known, and we received, after we started advertising, we received 139 million requests, of which 66 million were unique. This was a very large number of individuals seeking assistance. And of course, there were many individuals from one household that also sent the request, which is why ultimately it was 15 million that ended up getting supported. Now, once the SMSs arrived, we adopted a hybrid targeting approach. So we used the National Socioeconomic Registry and increased the threshold of assistance on the one hand. And on the other, we used data innovations for the first time. So we used data analytics for decision-making and resource allocations. And there was a very deliberate public policy action, and I'm quoting Mamta here because she said that if you want to use technology to benefit disadvantaged populations, there has to be a very deliberate public policy action to thread through technology within the system. So the reason why we used a hybrid target approach was because our National Socioeconomic Registry was 10 years old back in 2020. We have now completed the new registry. But when COVID struck back in February of 2020, we were looking at a registry that was 10 years old. Therefore, we had to use a hybrid approach. We checked applicants against the registry, but then we also employed wealth analytics. Now, the good thing is that Pakistan's personal 13 digits identity number is linked to information about travel, taxes, billing, asset ownership, and government employment status. So we use these parameters as wealth proxies for eligibility ascertainment. And the system that we developed, which essentially meant at the front end receiving the SMSs, then at the back end checking them against survey data and running the wealth analytics, and then subsequently sending out SMS messages for the payment notification. This system was end-to-end data-driven. There was no space for human intervention or maneuverability or tampering with the criteria. It was fully automated, it was rule-based, it was transparent. And the good thing is that it was also politically neutral, because Pakistan is a very large and vibrant federal polity with different political parties ruling different federating units. So there was huge acceptance of this program, because everybody saw within a matter of a week that the benefits of the program was actually accruing benefits in every nook and corner of the country, in every street and village, but at the same time, it was very apolitical. Coming back to the process, once people were declared eligible, they were sent SMS messages to collect their payment at thousands of campsites, which we had set up across the country. And within these campsites, there were 2 commercial banks who had set up their branchless banking networks. So their agents had these little point of sale machines. They sat within the campsites. And the hardware that they were using had the capability to take thumb impressions. And then the biometric signatures of these thumb impressions were verified in real time from the National Database Registration Authority. And once they were authenticated, people were paid and they would just go home. And then there was broad-based public announcements that you need to sit at home. The government is giving you this money so that you don't have to go to work. Please buy rations and sit at home. Now, we believe that this mass-scale assistance, where technology was the backbone, averted a major humanitarian catastrophe. And when we conducted a pulse telephonic survey when the operations were ongoing, and that survey showed us that 97% of the beneficiaries utilized the full amount and 93% actually spent it on food and rations. So with great humility, I would like to say that of all the cash transfer programs globally in the wake of COVID-19, ours was the fastest and the 3rd largest in terms of the percentage of population covered. For Pakistan, this was truly a watershed moment in terms of government functioning. It made the government more agile, more data-driven, more experimental, more ambitious, and it helped with the fast-track adoption of digital execution and new ways of coordination across multiple stakeholders, because there were many stakeholders involved in the execution, although we controlled it centrally in terms of coordination and overall design. What was most important was that this intervention cemented the relationship of citizens with the state, and it bolstered the confidence in the government's ability to execute well at scale. It was truly quite unique in terms of government functioning for our country. Now, there are many learnings from this execution, but I'd like to share 4, because Cecile, I know, would like me to talk about it. And Mamta has very eloquently talked about the potential for regional cooperation and the imperative post-COVID as well. So very quickly, I'd like to refer to 4 learnings from this experience. Firstly, and at a nuts and bolts level, very much with a technological lens, very much from the execution lens, and from the systems delivery lens, our experience has specific learnings for other countries that utilize unique personal identification systems, because it demonstrates that if you combine cell phone, SMS messaging, internet connectivity, national identities, numbers, and the capabilities of commercial banks, which exist in almost all of our South Asian countries, then you can develop a demand-based system to enable those in distress to seek social support. Essentially, by combining all these elements of the system, you can create an adaptive system which contributes to building resilience at scale as well. So that in a nutshell is the first takeaway. And the reason why I specifically mentioned cell phone SMS is because the penetration of smartphone is not as high as we would like to in our countries. And therefore, we still are, And while, of course, all of our countries are working to reduce the cost of cell phones, smartphones, we still have to live with a context where SMS messaging has to be used for delivery mechanisms if we have to develop them and scale them up today. Secondly, our experience has taught us that data innovations and digital delivery systems can only be deployed when there's a commitment to integrity, transparency, and accountability overall. Because if government itself is trying to game a system, if functionaries are trying to create the space for maneuverability, then this is not an approach they are going to adopt. And I generally believe that if you combine a good intention and integrity and a commitment to transparency with digital approaches, and if you're willing to shop around and mine from within your own system the various capabilities that can be threaded together to construct a delivery system, then it is only then that you have the capability to address the long-standing fault lines that have plagued public sector delivery in countries like ours. Thirdly, we learned that in order to develop a solution at scale, you need to draw on the competencies of many sectors across the public and private worlds. I recall in 2013, in 2013, I was a cabinet minister for the first time. And I was in an interim government. And when I stepped down after a few months, I wrote a paper in the Lancet about my reflections. And I wrote about 4 reflections. And one of the key reflections was that in order to deliver, you have to borrow competencies from various ministries. And as opposed to that, there is no incentive within government systems to forge that collaboration, because we think governments is one entity, but governments all over the world are not one entity. It's an archipelago of many institutions and ministries that have a disincentive to collaborate. So creating those incentives to develop systems is absolutely crucial. And we were very pleased that we were able to join many dots and draw on the strengths of many stakeholders as we executed. Finally, our experience in delivering SARS emergency cash showed us how cash transfer programs can be deployed to counter the socioeconomic fallout from COVID-19, which presents really a long-term predicament. And it is with this in view that I wrote a report which has details about the implementation challenges of SARS emergency cash and the know-how gained in designing and implementing this massive national program in real time in a context of complexity and uncertainty with speed. So I will share in the chat box a link of that report shortly. Thank you, and over back to you, Cecile.
Thank you, Sania. And it's really quite a remarkable story you're sharing with us there. So I'm going to start with you, Sania. In Pakistan, less than 40% of women own a mobile phone compared to 70% of men. And a large segment of vulnerable households and women do not have any digital access. So how has this divide impacted overall service delivery and social protection programs? And what have some of the solutions been? And one of our audience members is asking specifically, how have you digitally empowered women in rural areas? Over to you, Sania.
Oh, so that's a very important question, because whenever there is a digital divide, an overall digital divide, and then the gender-centered digital divide within a context, the delivery of services which have many digital threads does become a challenge. And Anita talked about the importance of community information centers. I couldn't agree more with her, because the role of community in delivering digital and financial literacy is so very important, in addition to, of course, the traditional approaches to awareness creation and communication. Now, because we have, as part of the SARS program, we've got a 50% plus policy, which means that more than 50% of all the benefits have to accrue to women across all the strands of SARS initiatives. And we regard digital and financial literacy as being such a core element of our interventions that we single it out as one of the 5 time-bound outcome-based goals of this program. So, of course, the other 4 quantitative goals focused on the number of families we have to reach in terms of the regular social protection operations, the number of families where we have to provide financial access to healthcare, the number of individuals where we intend to provide financial access to education. And I'm talking about a social protection program, and hence the social protection lens in terms of outcome level goals. But digital and financial literacy was such a salient, and I may be repeating myself, was such a salient component of the backbone that we centered one of the time-bound outcome-based goals on it. Now, because many of our recipients are women, the question was how to improve the level of digital literacy given the very wide gap, given the chasm, in fact, that you just referred to, Cecile. So we conducted a study to find out what the best modality would be to reach out to these very disadvantaged women in the far-flung rural areas of the country. And to our surprise, the findings made a lot of sense, but this is something that we had not thought about. The findings, in a nutshell, were that in order to target women in rural communities, you have to start with children in the house, and especially girls in the house, because they attend schools, and the potential for them to embrace digital and financial literacy is a lot higher, is far more higher than the likelihood of their mothers embracing this as one of the core aspects of benefiting from the services. And that's exactly what we are focusing on now. But an emphasis on communication, on information dissemination, on literacy-centered outcomes is not enough. In order to mainstream digital in the delivery of services for the disadvantaged, whether it is for health outcomes, for education outcomes, for social protection outcomes, for nutrition outcomes, you also have to work on the incentive structures and the infrastructure. So the cost of the mobile phone has to come down. The cost of the handset has to come down. There have to be incentives for the adoption and availability of the smartphone. There are fiscal measures that need to be taken overall to facilitate the private sector, which has a very core role to play in this. Then connectivity is, of course, as we all know, a major game changer. So in the far-flung rural areas, where the private sector will not have an incentive to invest in developing the infrastructure to facilitate connectivity, the government has to step in. And there are mechanisms and financing mechanisms and execution mechanisms. And I could talk about what my country has done and what the approach of my country is. But all of our countries have approaches to facilitating the access to connectivity in far-flung areas. So there are these different dimensions: the literacy and the approach to literacy, the financial incentives, and infrastructure. But more important than that is the actual benefit that individuals see being accrued on the ground. In SARS interventions, for example, women and girls get notifications on their handsets. So they get to know through SMS whether their money has arrived, which is why every woman beneficiary of SARS has a cell phone in their pockets. And even if they're unable to read themselves, every time an SMS comes, they are very keen to know whether it is the SMS from SARS notifying their regular stipend, their school stipend for the child. So all these things have to come together in order for digital approaches to be adopted fully. And I just want to also mention, because the point about women and girls is so crucial to this whole discourse and discussion and public policy debate and action. I just want to mention that Pakistan is taking this very seriously. So we have just upscaled our national education conditional cash transfer program where girls get a higher stipend amount compared to boys. And also in our education, in our nutrition and health conditional cash transfer program, which is running currently in 20% of the districts and will be upscaled to nationally within this fiscal year, girls get a higher stipend amount. This is to signal the importance of the girl child. And although it may be very early to quantify its impact on ground, but I think that if successive governments could continue with this policy, then the impact of a girl favoring stipend both in the education and health streams, I believe, is going to be quite profound over the course of years.
I know that a lot of people have been studying the Pakistan example, and how has that had an effect in South Asia more broadly?
I think we have to look at options on a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum, you can have, experience sharing as the outcome of interest. So the right platforms that allow government-to-government exchange with civil society and academic engagement from across the region. A setting where you can have frequent ongoing exchanges at a periodic level, where you can have demand-driven questions posted, and where the regional collaboration can be around specific questions and specific problems, because our systems of all the South Asian countries have evolved from the colonial context, so that there's a lot of systems similarity. So I think at one end of the spectrum is this experience sharing, the knowledge platforms as its tools in its various shades and hues. That's the bare minimum which we should be doing. And if the structures are not functioning, I think institutions such as the World Bank can help create those. I think that is at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, you have more concrete institutional arrangements of collaboration, the common frameworks, the common regulatory arrangements, the policy convergence, common institutions, pooling of resources and pooling of expertise. And unfortunately, some of the institutions that were mandated to do this, such as the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, hasn't done very well. But I think at the bare minimum, we should have platforms for academic exchange. That is the least we can do. Very exciting listening to all the colleagues from the neighboring countries. I just want to say, as the last point, that data is an input. Technology is a tool. They are not ends in themselves. They're meant to work. They're meant to make systems work better. They're meant to improve evidence-based decision-making and enhance efficiency and effectiveness. And our outcome of interest is that the systems of public sector delivery that have been plagued by inefficiencies and all kinds of pilferage and rent-seeking should be transformed with the use of evidence-based decision-making that's data-driven and through technology, which brings in its wake a number of different benefits. And that is our goal. Sometimes we tend to think of data and technology as ends in themselves, and that's not the case. The outcomes of interest are still a good quality healthcare, universal access to good quality education, improved nutrition, and social protection for all. And when we do not lose sight of these outcomes of interest, and when we look at data and technology in the right perspective, then our objective should be to create the new systems where technology, policy, and innovations come together. And I think that experience sharing, knowledge sharing across countries would be extremely helpful, because we're all struggling and we're all at the same stage of the learning curve. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this takes us to the end of our conversation.